This is Tech Talk Detroit with Brian Spurgeon and Chuck Lobert. Tech Talk Detroit brings you the latest in tech news and Detroit happenings every week.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Tech Talk Detroit podcast. I'm Chuck, here with Brian, and we forgot to mention on the last one, but we were going to miss a week, so we're coming to you 2 weeks after our last one. We were both out of town on business last week. So, Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you were doing last week?
Yeah, so I was invited to go down to Microsoft's Learning Center in Dallas. They have a new product, Windows Virtual Desktop, that they were doing a big training on in terms of, you know, the benefits, the features, a lot of technical deep dive of how to set it up. So I think ultimately, yeah, it was really cool to go down there and see it.
Awesome. So were you at their offices down there then?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they got a nice setup just outside of downtown Dallas. And they flew in a couple experts and, you know, had just a bunch of different IT technology vendors come in and kind of learn about it. So it's one of those, it's a cloud solution that really gets your workforce mobile, allows people to get access to your company data securely from anywhere. And it gives you a virtual Windows 10 desktop in the cloud.
Nice. I was out in sunny, not so warm Las Vegas for a marketing peer group thing. So it was good. It was nice to, it's always nice to see what other people are doing for marketing and sales and such. But so anyways, to get into our topic for this week, we were going to talk a little bit about planning. So we're towards the beginning of the year. Going into every year, every company's got to do some planning, for all the different departments within their company. And obviously one of the big things that people are planning for is their IT and the technology within their business. So I thought we'd talk a little bit today about what companies should be looking at as they do their annual planning, for 2020. What types of things should be on their radar? What should they be concerned about, and so on?
Yeah, and I think ultimately, every business is a little different. The needs from a technology perspective are definitely different from one company to the next. But I think ultimately we got, there's a few things I think that should be consistent no matter what your business model is. I think really ultimately you're looking at your security posture, you're looking at your hardware requirements for the year, both from a budgetary standpoint and also from a can the hardware deliver what our expectations are.
Right.
I think obviously your main line of business software you have to take a look at, and then your technology support. So is your in-house staff sufficient based on your growth plans with the business? Are you staffed appropriately, and when do you need to get hiring process started? And I think the last couple would be probably I would consider looking at your phone system. And then last, just training, conferences, any kind of secondary training and education that you need to be aware of.
Yeah, and there are some conferences that I know we consider as kind of must-attend conferences. We can kind of get into that a little bit later, but there are obviously you're going to look at the different conferences for the software that you use, the hardware that you use, stuff like that. But then there's some just industry-wide kind of must-attend conferences out there that we can talk about. But let's focus a little bit on security first. So that's such a broad topic when we look at it, and it's different for every single business. So I think what you really have to do from a business perspective is really kind of set a budget, for what you want to spend on security, and then determine what the risks are out there and how much you're willing to kind of put forward to protect it. Because you can do anything from doing basically nothing for security all the way up to doing some very high-end, full security operations centers, all the tools and all of that kind of stuff, which is obviously gets to be, a bit more expensive if you're doing it yourself. You have to have the expertise to do it if you're doing it yourself, all of that kind of stuff. So there's such a wide range that businesses can do. Maybe we can talk a little bit about kind of what a business should look at in relation to security to really help figure out kind of what avenue they should be going down.
Yeah, I think that's one of those points where it's going to be different for every business, but there are some baseline stuff that everybody really should be taking into consideration. I think for starters, something that should be on everybody's plan, if you're not already taking advantage of it, is security awareness training.
Yep.
Everything, all the data that comes back always points to the fact that your internal workforce is really your biggest risk. And that's not to say that they're intentionally out there to
Just
do
a lack
something
of
malicious, but a lack of education in terms of what the risk and the threats are is your biggest risk. So I think that's something that should absolutely be in the fold. There's several different products that are giving you that. You're looking at KnowBe4 as a top solution. WebRoot has a security awareness training. There's others. Those are the two that we use the most. But and ultimately, what that's going to do is simulate these different types of threats, via email, and it's going to give you scoring back on your users. So when Joe from accounting goes and clicks an email about getting a free iPod, is the iPod even a thing? I don't even know what's going on. But if Joe goes to get
went back 10 years. But that's okay.
I know. If Joe goes to get the free iPod,
or if he's trying to support that prince over in Africa.
Absolutely,
or got it.
So when he clicks that email and registers all this information and gives him his email address and password so that he can get that for free, it's going to redirect you to a page to say, hey, iPods aren't a thing anymore, and we just got your information and you failed. So Joe's going to have to go through some training and understand that type of email is too good to be true. And I think that's what you do, and you can do a lot of things like incentivizing it for your users. And ultimately, I think that should be one of the top things.
The thing to remember too is this isn't just for the large organizations, the Fortune 500s. Everybody is a target. If you're a business, you're a target. So I think the latest statistic I saw was something like 58% of the attacks are aimed at small businesses. And what they said, this was something I saw from Microsoft. What they said is that your average breach is going to cost that small business about $120,000. Now, that's not even taken into account any reputation damage, all of that kind of stuff as well. So it's really something that all businesses need to be doing something for security. It's just now a matter of figuring out what the risks are out there and how much of that security you want to do, depending on, a big piece is going to be what kind of a company you are, what kind of data that you're housing, where it's being housed, all of that kind of stuff.
And
obviously,
what kind of regulations you're under.
Exactly. Yeah. So a financial firm's going to have different security needs. An accounting firm's going to have different security needs, a healthcare firm, and so on. So it really just comes down, you got to look at the specific business, and you're right, look at the regulations, the compliance requirements that you're under, and then see what you can do to kind of shore that stuff up.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, just to hit a couple more of the baseline stuff, obviously at this point, everybody should have at least a managed antivirus, anti-malware solution. The days of going to the store and buying a boxed copy of 3 licenses should be long gone. You should have a centrally managed antivirus solution. With that being said, you also should ensure that you have a firewall in place that is also current on the subscriptions. All the major firewalls now require you to have a security subscription in place, and those benefits of what they give you absolutely should be done.
And a typical off-the-shelf router is not necessarily a firewall.
Yeah,
so you
absolutely.
got to make sure you've got a good business class firewall, SonicWall, a Cisco, Meraki, something that's actually a good business class firewall that's got those active subscriptions and such.
Yep, and I think something else to look at as well is, from last week's topic is, again, the Windows 7, the Server 2008. Make sure you have, if you have any of those type of products still in place, that you have a plan to get off those as quick as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's hard to answer the question of, well, how far do you go for security? Because it's going to depend on the business. But something too, we had a question come in recently where somebody had asked, because they were on Office 365, they had experienced a breach, and they had read something about multi-factor authentication, and they were asking, well, is that something that we should be doing? And absolutely, anybody that's on, not even just Office 365, but anything that has multi-factor authentication available really should be implementing that, correct?
100%. And look, when you look at even just on your personal level, take the business out of it. You have, Microsoft through your Outlook.com or your Live account or Gmail. Everybody knows a website that you log into, and in order to get into that website, it's going to send you an email code to punch in. So it's happening whether you want it or not already in the personal realm. You absolutely should be taking advantage of that in the business realm. And Microsoft's requiring partners like us to have this in place in order to leverage their services and be able to deploy their products. So it's becoming a requirement from these larger entities.
Yeah. So if that's not something that you have today, if you don't know that you have it today, talk to your IT department, talk to your IT provider, whoever it is, and that's something that absolutely should be in place is multi-factor authentication, especially if you do have Office 365, because it's just so easy to set up. Like it should just be a part of the basic setup. So let's move on now. You had mentioned hardware as a topic as well. So when you look at your hardware for the year, what you're looking at is stuff like warranty renewals. What's the age of the hardware? Is it time to replace it? And when we talk about time to replace it, that can be kind of an arbitrary thing to say because different people view things as different, but what we always go off of is simply the best class, right? So for a typical server, you're probably talking, about 5 years, right?
Yep.
And then you figure your end user devices, probably more like 3 or 4 is about what you should be able to expect out of them. And you always want everything to be under warranty if at all possible.
Yeah, I think that's key. So, there's a couple things there. With the hardware, with the replacements, you should have a good budget and understanding and expect to have a schedule of time to go in and refresh all of your equipment. Like you said, servers 5 years, 3-4 years is a good mark for end user equipment. Another thing that I think, though, you should take a look at is the components of some of that hardware. So I think one of the single greatest upgrades that a business can do is converting from the old style hard drives to a new solid state drive. When you're talking about getting a good return on investment, that's going to give you the most. So I think whether it's you looking at refreshing your current hardware with new ones, I absolutely would say that solid state drives are a baseline requirement. And depending on how old your current hardware is, it might be worthwhile to explore upgrading the hard drives on those as is.
Yeah, and then when it comes to the server infrastructure, when it comes time to look at whether it's replacement, refreshing, it's probably a good time to actually consider the cloud too. It's not going to be a fit for everybody, but for a lot of companies, the cloud is a great fit. And when we look at it, most of the stuff that we're looking at is what's the expectation for the business as far as uptime, how long can they be down if something happens, all of that kind of stuff. And based on that, that's really where the cloud comes in, is you're always up. It's still a very secure platform as well. So usually that's kind of when we start those discussions of cloud versus on-premise is when people are really talking about having to have that constant uptime.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the advantages with going the cloud route, if it makes sense, is you have more of a monthly budgeted cost as opposed to every 5 years having a large upfront investment you need to make on top of the monthly cost that goes along with maintaining that hardware. So I think that's something that you should consider as well. And a lot of times it doesn't have to be, setting up your own private cloud and hosting your own servers. A lot of these line of business applications offer their own cloud options that are priced in a sense where they're taking the responsibility of managing the hardware on the back end. You're just getting the software delivered to you.
Yeah, and I think in general, speaking about line of business applications, the only time that doesn't really make sense is if you have a lot of customization. That just can't happen if you're on their cloud version. A lot of times for line of business applications, their cloud version is kind of you get what you get, and you get the features that are available, and there's not going to be a lot of customization in the back end and such. But if you can live with that, now that puts the responsibility of maintaining that hardware, keeping everything updated and all of that on that line of business provider versus on you.
Yeah, I think you should at least do your homework and see, what are the options out there and make a determination if it makes sense. And, maybe it doesn't make sense for this year. That might be a big move to figure out on the fly. But you might be looking at planning for that in the next year or maybe before your next server refresh. So I think that's key. The other big thing is, like I said, I went to the training last week for the Windows Virtual Desktops.
Yep.
You might want to look at more of like a modern workplace type solution like that. If you're the type of business where the business extends outside of the brick and mortar that is your office,
which most do now.
And most do. That's what we find. And I think you should be looking at those type of solutions. Is there a benefit to being able to access my desktop anywhere from any computer? Is there a benefit to extending my data to the cloud to be able to collaborate and also be able to securely lock it down? So I think that should be something that's that's at least talked about and determine. It might not make sense for you, or you might not feel comfortable with it. But again, it's something that you should at least think about.
Yeah, the must that comes with line of business applications, whether it's time to look at something new or going to the cloud or not, the one must is you got to keep it under a support agreement. We see a lot of times where somebody has a line of business application that's very important to their business, and then they let the support lapse, they aren't getting the updates, and then they run into a problem with it, and now what, right? You got to be able to go back to that manufacturer, those developers that originally developed the software, to be able to get support. So that's always a big recommendation, is make sure that you're keeping those support agreements in place. Mm-hmm. And so that's obviously an annual expense that should be on that technology roadmap every single year, is making sure that those things, firewall renewals, all of that kind of stuff is being kept up to date.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. You wouldn't go and drive your brand new vehicle uninsured, so
right.
Certainly your business data should be secured as well in terms of making sure that the hardware is going to be up and ready to go in the event if you do have a problem.
Yep. Yeah, and so then, as we move on, kind of down the line of the things that you mentioned, we talked a bit about support, outsource support versus in-house support. And again, that's going to kind of be customized by the company and what the expectations are of the users, what the expectations are of the leadership, what fits into the budget, and so on. There's kind of a lot that goes into that, but really it's, if a company is not a larger company, it a lot of times either makes sense to have it outsourced or have your in-house staff supplemented by somebody that's outsourced that can bring kind of some different ideas to the table, handle stuff like strategic planning and projects and all of that kind of stuff. What other benefits can you think of, with that comes from kind of adding on to your in-house IT team with some outsourced help as well?
Yeah, so I think, certainly depending on your structure, there could be a benefit to having an in-house team because you got hands on deck, in the event of, needing somebody to look at something physically, you have them there. But where I think a lot of companies come short is who's going to manage that team efficiently, right? You have these guys in, they might be great techs and stuff, but who knows what training to give these guys? And I think that's where the supplemental outsourced IT can be a great relationship, because you have another company that relies upon investing in their people and staying current with all the latest technology. You're able to leverage that, and you can't really put a cost to that. Most businesses can't afford to send their internal staff out for 3, 4, 5 weeks a year to get trained up and just basically pause support in the meantime while they're out of town. So I think training for a business that does staff their own IT team can be a real challenge in terms of staying current. And that plays into your decision making. When you're looking at cloud and you're looking at, should I be taking advantage of Microsoft Teams collaboration, or should I be looking at this virtual desktop? You might be handicapped a bit by your internal team if they don't have the capability to deliver on it.
Yeah.
There might be a hesitancy to say, hey, let's go ahead and let's move these servers to the cloud, because they've never done it. They're not sure, and like anybody, naturally, you would be a little leery of taking on such a large project without any kind of support.
Yeah, you kind of tend to get pigeonholed into what that particular person knows, what they're comfortable with, all of that kind of stuff, versus bringing in an outside opinion from, like you said, somebody that's trained on all the different technologies out there, have lots of different experience with lots of different companies and all of that kind of stuff. So that's kind of some of the benefits that you get. So
yeah, and I think real quick, just something else on that note too, is what we find a lot is when businesses are looking and they realize they need some extra support to help out with the internal IT. Most businesses, if they even have a ticketing system in place, it's some kind of freeware, unsupported, just thrown together, send an email in kind of thing. I think that's another advantage of leveraging an outsourced IT company, is you can bring your internal staff into the fold of that company and leverage their tools and their software. So I think that's something that should also be considered.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked a little bit about training, conferences. For me, one of my must-attend conferences every year is Microsoft, their Inspire conference. It's a great conference, and it really kind of depends, what side of the business that you're on. But if you're on that planning side and the kind of the leadership side, that's a really good one. I know you really like the Ignite conference, which is also from Microsoft, and that's again, on the technical side, on the leadership side as well. Any other must-attend conferences that you would say people should really be looking at?
Well, I think for one, I would say you should be attending industry-specific conferences. Mm-hmm. So all the clients we support, doesn't matter what vertical they're in, there is great conferences that are aimed at that. And in particular, you can focus on the technology elements of that conference. I think you should really look at your main line of business software and consider going to anything that they put on.
Yep.
It's a great way to learn new features, get hands-on training, network with some of the people that are supporting it and developing it. And more often than not, you're going to find other third-party add-ons to that software that are there that you may not have been able to come across otherwise.
So they might have a user group that might even meet more often than annually, but that's always something that's good to be in. You get to kind of network with other people that use that same software and learn more from them as well. Mm-hmm. I know we have one must-attend conference, or I don't know if you can call it a conference yet, but in June or July that we wanted to talk about today. It's going to be the Tech Fest that's going to be in Detroit. So there'll be more information coming in the future, but we're going to be hosting a technical, one-day type of conference in Detroit, and we're going to have different topics. We're going to talk about productivity, we're going to talk about security, and it's lots of different technology topics. And then it's going to be nice. We'll have a dinner, we'll have some drinks, have a little networking time as well. So stay tuned for some more information about that as well. Excuse me, I had to take a cough break there. But with that, let's talk a little bit about anything going on in Detroit. I believe this coming weekend you were saying that there's a beer. What was it? A beer festival?
Yeah, there's multiple. Actually, there's a couple different brewery tours going on this weekend. So I think one of them is the Motor City Brewery Tour, which hits 3 or 4 different breweries in downtown. Again, I think that's a great way to kind of get down there and see some new places you probably haven't been, try some different beer if that's the kind of thing you're into. And I think that one starts, I believe, at Jolly Pumpkin in Midtown. So I would definitely recommend doing one of those. I've done those in the past, and they're always a good time. Speaking
of breweries, the big news this past week was Atwater selling to Molson Coors. That was pretty big for a Detroit-based brewery that... It's been in Detroit for a while. I know you and I have been there. It's a great brewery, but that's pretty big to get bought out by that national company.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's cool to see that. I think a lot of people, kind of get worried about they really love the local beer and how it's going to change and they've sold out. But at the end of the day, I think when you're in business and you have the ability to grow your brand and to something that's a national scale, that's a good accomplishment. So I think that's exciting news, and I'll be curious to see where they go from here.
Yeah, and I know they're keeping on the leadership for Atwater, so that's good. They're going to keep everything open as far as they've got the location downtown, location out in Grand Rapids, location in Grosse Pointe. So that's all going to stay running. So I don't know how much is going to change outside of now their distribution, and the division that bought them is in charge of a lot of the craft beer products that the company owns. So I'm sure that they will keep things pretty much the same going along as it has been.
Yeah, and I think really when you look at it, these major companies like Budweiser and Molson Coors, they distribute a beer on a large scale, but they're also realizing that this niche craft beer market that was probably never supposed to challenge them is just blown up beyond what they could ever imagine. And I think ultimately they're not that microbrewery. That's not where their bread and butter is. So you have to imagine that they're not going to come in and change too much, that they're going to try to learn a bit and let these things function on their own.
And the brewery business is so huge in Michigan. It's it's good to see. I know a couple of my favorites. I love downtown Northville here. North Center Brewing Company over in Wixom is one of my favorites. Drafting Table. I think it was who Kristen and Aaron did a really good job over there. And then Block Brewery is one of my favorites over where I live there in Brighton.
Yeah, I think even on the east side, I live in St. Clair Shores, and there's 4 or 5 breweries now. You got Dragon Meat open in a second location. I think there's a Copper Hop. I just happened to drive down Mac the other day and seen it. And, it's I think every city kind of has their brewery now, it seems like. So I think it's cool. I didn't know that it was ever going to continue to grow like this. It doesn't seem to be slowing down. But, I think Michigan's got a good presence. When I was in Dallas, Bell's had multiple breweries on tap everywhere I go. And I think I see Two Hearted just about everywhere. Mm-hmm. So, I think it's cool. I'm glad to live here. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's great to see. Well, I think that wraps up this episode, and we'll see you again in a week.